Hi everyone, how are you? Welcome back to Marla's channel. I just wanted to come on live and talk a little bit about the sword. There's this book that I just discovered in my library because I have a lot of books and I've got a book fetish. I need money to just fund my book fetish. Yes, uh, it's my thing. But anyways, and I'm looking through the index. And the index is like God's law without apology. And I'm like, oh, yes. Oh, Christ rules now. Ah, the purpose of the sword. Ah, Christ reigns now. Give me liberty. Oh, I love it. Anyways, God's law without apology. That's what I need. That's exactly what I need. So I want to read this excerpt. And it says, why do we have government? Why should we submit to civil government? Is it ever appropriate to seek the overthrow of a government by the use of force? So, this author is going to give me a concise biblical answer to these other questions. And the main body of thought will resolve around two issues: the biblical purpose for civil rulers and the biblical foundation for revolution against civil rulers. Oh, isn't that divine? I read that and I was like, I need to do a podcast. Although many will insist that these are contrary principles, they're not. And I agree with this author. Godly obedience to our righteous rebellion against civil authority spring from one root: sovereign kingship, the unchallengeable authority, and the immutable law of God. Oh, the rule of Christ is the fount from which flow the authority for righteous civil authority to govern, as well as the authority to overthrow wicked despots. Isn't that great? Oh. Okay, here, I gotta read this. Herein lies no new theology. This was the theology that animated John Knox and the Scottish Reformers in their uprising against Mary, Queen of Scots. This was the theology that undergirded Oliver Cromwell in the Puritan Revolution against the final execution of Charles I. This was the theology that ended the monstrous repressive doctrine known as the divine rights of kings. Tragically, most Christians today have no idea how critical that history and its attendant theology are to them personally. Now, this sounds very, very cool because in our state in the world today, we could use a little of this theology in America. Most Christians in America at the changing of this millennial do not have a clue who John Knox or Mary Stuart or Oliver Cromwell or Charles I were. Most of us are the victims of the dumbed down government. Schools which deliberately ignore Christianity's indispensable link and Catholicism. with our history. Most Americans don't even know that the Spanish owned most of the territory in the Americas. Only 13 colonies were British. The Catholics owned everything. We even funded the war, the Revolutionary War. Okay, it's no surprise that most Christians would know little or nothing of the great theological battles that were waged and the critical theological truths that catapult men and nations into conflict and even revolutions. However, what nearly all American Christians do know is that the birthday of America is celebrated on the 4th of July. Most also know that the day also celebrates the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which is called for revolution against King George III. If pressed as to why the colonists revolted, some may blurt out, taxation without representation, and end there, hoping not to be embarrassed, but intuitively knowing that far more had to be at stake. In fact, the Declaration of Independence gave an extensive line upon line indictment of the atrocities of George III, which marked him as a tyrant. While it is true that taxation without representation was listed in the Declaration, in different words, as one of King George's offenses against the colonists, it simply was not the mainspring for the revolution, and it obviously was not the guiding principle that led the founding fathers and the revolutionaries to call for the overthrow of the tyrant. The undergirding principle of the revolution was, are you ready to hear this? Was that God had endowed men with unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, property. And that it was the duty of government to protect those rights. Is the government protecting our rights today? No. Subsequently, the state or the king could not arbitrarily violate any of these three fundamental God-given rights. If the state did flagrantly violate these rights, rather than abide by its God-ordained mandate to protect life, liberty, and property, the people could overthrow the government. Isn't that a wonderful idea? Oh, but more importantly, the Declaration spelled out clearly the authority by which the citizens could revolt against tyrants. The authority of God and His law. And what is Martha campaigning on? The authority of God to govern each individual. And the individual's authority to govern the government. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? So, the founders believed that God and His law authorized them to break the yoke of George III from their neck. No king, quote, but Jesus and rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. No king but Jesus, and rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. I could give you a talk on obedience. God just pulled me from the abyss. Those are just two common phrases in the language of our founding fathers. Our founding fathers. Our founding fathers' explicit belief that God had authored them in His Word to overthrow tyrants sprang from the same root of theology that fed the Knoxonian and Cromwellian revolutions. Oh. And you know what? The revolution was funded by Catholics. Yes, the Catholic Church and the Catholic vote is essential to any election. And I'm the Catholic vote. I hope. Right, God? I don't know. I gotta ask God. I hope I am. I hope. I can't say that. But this book is really good. It just brings me delight to read this book. It is so inspirational. Americans founders, then the founders' names are to us. And the glorious Christian theology that Cromwell and Knox lived out, that God is king and his law is supreme, gave inspiration to birth the greatest nation that the world has seen since ancient Israel. Not only did the founders find the undergirding for revolution in Christian theology, they also found the principles for governing. They also, yes, Christian theology people provided the fire for revolution. But more importantly, Christian theology was their foundation for governing. Oh my Lord, with virtually unanimous voice, the founders and leaders of America for its first 100 years believed that Mosaic law and Christian principles, also referred to as the natural law, Thomas Aquinas, were the bedrock upon which the republic, not a democracy, was and must be built. This theology helped make America great, politically and socially. Boom. And abandoning it has helped destroy us. So, are you with me or are you without me? Are we going to continue abandoning it and destroy us even further? Or will you acknowledge the Christian foundation in America? Hey, the foundation that gave each and one of us freedom. For everyone watching this video right now, I proudly confess, along with this author, that I want to see civic law restored in our nation and around the world, based on the law given by God to Moses on the mount and sealed with a kiss by Christ. I proudly proclaim the ethical and legal system of Christ and Moses as flawless, infallible, and unprovable, and the very best we could possibly build on. There is no other system on earth that is better than Americanism. Consider this. Ready? At the time Moses received the law of God, no other nation in the world possessed a practical law, a practiced law. No, no other possessed or practiced a law with such protection of individuals, such incredible land and chattel property rights, such decentralizing of power and authority, such constraints on the power of kings and judges, such rights for those accused of a crime, such punishment of criminals and compensation of victims. Later, at the time of the resurrection of Christ and the birth of Christianity, almost every nation practiced human sacrifice. People, are you with me? To spread the spread of Christianity, thanks to the Spanish. Yes, I'm Spanish. Yes, we spread Christianity further than any other group, and Christian government alone obliterated that hideous pagan practice which we are seeing come back in America today. By the way, human sacrifice was and perhaps still is practiced in this century in India and certain African nations, nations yet unsubmitted to Christ. It was the spread of Christianity, thanks to Spanish people, and biblical law, expounded by Locke, Aquinas, Blackstone, and Augustine, cleaved by Patrick Henry and George Washington, that gave all America and the Carroll family, that gave all Americans the political freedoms we take for granted today. Yes, I gladly, proudly proclaim that on this biblical foundation, on this Catholic foundation, I would see civic law rest. Because without the Catholic Church, we cannot have this biblical foundation. Because most of America was Catholic, and only a fraction of America were British Christians. Got it? So now, I ask, the arrogant unbeliever, upon whose ethical system do you base your standard for civic law? Comment below and let me know your answer. Whose philosophy would you undergird your vision of American jurisprudence? Would you have the prophet Friedrich Nietzsche? Would you have Adolf Hitler? Would you have Karl Marx? Would you have Mao? Or Putin? Stalin? Who? Or would you prefer Karl Marx, who expostulated on the glories of equality, the loss of private property, and his murderous disciple Vladimir Lenin, who built Marx's utopia with the blood of millions? Or would you sell us the bloody, chaotic French Revolution and its heroes such as the whoremonger Rousseau, who left his children to die in orphanages, and Robespierre, who helped shed the blood of thousands of innocents? Or perhaps Plato or Socrates, who lived in a culture that practiced human sacrifice and glorified pedophilia. What religion, what religious system would you like to see undergird our culture and law? Hinduism, with its oppression of women, child temple prostitution, and degrading caste system? Mohammedanism, with its political and religious oppression? How about atheism of the French Revolution with all its miseries, rapine, and bloodshed? Or perhaps you would like to sell us on the new age superstition and witchcrafts that's currently right now demonically rising up in America that still keep much of Africa in social and political chaos. It's the reason that Cubans are so free. We learn to live with our African brothers and sisters, but we started marrying each other and converting our African brothers and sisters and rising 25% were mulatto. I don't know about you. Catholics are awesome. Or maybe you prefer the model of law and order and centralized bureaucracy of Maoist communist China, which mandates forced abortions, shoots its protesting students, jails its Christians, uses slave labor camps, and can't feed its people. Oh, and now we have ESG that proudly is promoted by China. Bitcoin, crypto, it's China's way of watching us. Or perhaps would you simply have us submit our political heart and soul to our oligarchical masters, the Supreme Court? Certainly they can create law out of thin air with the ABA and codify it. Or perhaps would just base society on the innate goodness of man and human reason. Oh, that goodness is so flawed. The goodness and reason that has made this bloodiest, most murderous century since the birth of Christ. I await your pathetic liberal arts collegiate answer in the comments below. Or maybe the arrogant, self-assured, elitist who dismisses Mosaic law as archaic, unjust, too libertarian, or too severe has little or no knowledge of history. More importantly, he or she has absolutely nothing of any relevance to offer in Christianity's place. They have nothing. Kamala Harris has nothing that has been time proven, such as the scriptures. They are bankrupt. They are meaningless philosophies, have proven to be complete failures. Professing to be wise, they have become fools. Just look at Biden. Look at McFarland. Look at half of the Democrats. Look at some Republicans. Those who bow down to philosophical idols should be ashamed. Believers in Christ should not be. Catholics should not be ashamed of their heritage. It is unbelievers, ethically empty emperor who has no clothes. While the adversaries of Mosaic law and Christian liberty may not be able to defend their ethics, frankly, they have no need to. They have the reins of authority. Their naked, embarrassing, drunken emperor is still enthroned. They have captured our courts, our universities, the media, the medicines, and more. Our law, our legal education, American paganism, elite are marching forward with their agendas, and the fruit of their ethicless endeavors is quite horrifying to watch and to behold. Violence is flourishing. Injustice is common. In our courts, families are being decimated. Youth are filling up prisons. True land ownership is a forgotten memory of the past. And individual rights and freedom, as defined by God, are being crushed before our eyes. But where and how will it end? But we know it must end in death. Cultural and societal death. The death of America and the whole world. For God has decreed it. How did we go from the pinnacle of Christian liberty to a cesspool of iniquity and slavery? Comment below. Could be cited. Are critical an equation, such like cowardice and corruption in the church. The failure of Christians to be the salt and light. A pastorate content to withdraw from cultural conflict and wait till Jesus comes. Theology that predicts defeat, hence becomes self-fulfilling. But I want you to focus on one prime first cause, one key reason for America's cultural, economic, religious, judicial, and urban demise. Evil civil magistrates, evil rulers, those who abandon God's law. They're all on the left, by the way. As it relates to civic law, are the prime cause in the moral disintegration of America. I'm going to quote the Proverbs 29:2. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. God's word has much to say on government. His word explains the origin of civil government, the purpose of civil government, the means of attaining the purpose of civil government, the authority over civil government, the standard of civil government. What happens when civil government rebels against heavenly authority and law? Just read Thomas Aquinas. He'll tell you it all. The biblical principle and theology were commonly known among average Christians, Catholics and Protestants alike, a century and a half ago, maybe even 2 centuries now. Today we are hard-pressed to find one clergy in 10 who can eloquently expound these themes. The average Christian is clueless. And I think I'm being called to tell you all this because I'm Marla Fernandez, the Cuban girl, the crazy Cuban girl from Miami, you know. I don't know. As the subtitles suggest, submission to civil authority and the overthrow of tyrants. We'll observe two opposite sides. This is the book. In this matter, submission and revolution. I think God just called me and kind of showed me what submission was. Okay? So, I want to end first that my knowledge is incomplete, and I do read a lot, and I thank God for divine intervention and intellectual wisdom. I don't know it all, but you know, with books, I'm pretty close to knowing it all, and with God's help, I can share it all, because I have guts and gumption, and I'm Cuban en route, because I'm really American. I'm first generation American. You know, my parents came here in 1961. They fled Castro's Cuba, and so they indoctrinated me in the Cuban and the American way. I invite all of you, fellow students, theologians, the scriptures, students of history, lovers of liberty, to expound on what I'm saying today. If you don't have any knowledge, share it. Perhaps a few men, and maybe some women, will see a light shining through this darkened glass and will write and talk a more clear rendition of the truth at hand. And if any of my videos or writings ever emerge as a result of my learned ways, I am grateful to God eternally for giving me this ability. And it is my hope and prayer that my feeble attempts will give you, by God's grace, a more fervent love for Christ and Catholicism, a greater awe of His law, and an unshakable faith in the knowledge of His glorious eternal reign. Soli Deo, Gloria.